After just 6 years of serving his 13-year sentence, Oscar Pistorius, the infamous ex-Paralympian who fatally shot his girlfriend back in 2013, has been denied early release from prison. 10 years ago, this story was an international sensation due to the controversy that surrounded the ex-athlete's very contentious alibi. But was he guilty? Did he truly know what he was doing when he pulled the trigger that night? Or was this a simple mistake, which unfortunately took the life of an innocent person? Well, before we answer these questions, let's first recap what actually happened on that fateful day. In the early hours of February 14th, 2013, Oscar Pistorius is suddenly woken up to what he believed to be the sound of an intruder in his home. He quickly gets out of bed and grabs his gun, which he kept nearby for protection. He then walks to the entrance of his bedroom, which was located in a separate wing of the house. Pistorius later claims that he shouted a warning to the intruder, telling them to leave his home. However, there was no response. He then fired 4 shots through the closed bathroom door, which he believed was the location of the intruder. But once he realizes that his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, was not in bed with him, he becomes fearful that she may have been the source of the sound. Oscar then went to open the door, only to find that it was locked. He used a cricket bat to break down the door, and this is when he finds Reva inside, unresponsive and fatally wounded. He attempts to revive her, but Reva was later declared dead at the scene. Following the shooting, Pistorius is arrested and charged with murder. He immediately claims that he had mistaken his girlfriend for an intruder and had acted in self-defense, but the prosecution argued that he had intentionally shot her after an argument. The case went to trial, and after a lengthy legal process, Pistorius was found guilty of culpable homicide, a verdict closely related to manslaughter, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, this sentence was later increased to 13 years and 5 months, as the charges were upgraded to murder. Now, before we go into the evidence, I feel it's necessary to quickly explain that burglary and property crime are very common in South Africa, particularly in urban areas. According to the South African Police Service, their 2013 annual crime report showed that there were over 245,000 reported cases of residential burglary in South Africa that year, which represents a relatively high number of burglaries during the time of the incident. I actually made a video a few weeks back on some of the other heinous crimes that have occurred in South Africa in recent years, a number of which were related to burglary. So I'll leave a link towards the end of the video if you'd like to check that out. But from my research, it would appear that these crimes are usually a result of poverty, inequality, or unemployment, as they seem to create a sense of resentment and frustration among those who feel left behind by the system. So with this in mind, I feel it's only fair to start with the defense of Oscar Pistorius. So, one of the main questions asked in this case was, why was he so quick to pull the trigger? Well, although it may seem obvious to us, many people, including myself, have never been in a situation where there has been a potential intruder in our home, so it's quite difficult to comment. Also, as previously explained, South Africa is certainly no stranger to fatal burglaries, so it's not out of the question that this could have been an intruder in Oscar's house that night. And to further back this point, Oscar has a documented history of being anxious and fearful, which again supports the argument that he genuinely believed his life was in danger. In addition, Oscar's defense team argued that his disability caused him to feel especially vulnerable, as he may have been seen as an easy target to potential burglars. There were also no eyewitnesses to the shooting, and Oscar's version of events could not be conclusively disproven. And due to his positive reputation as an athlete and a public figure before the shooting, many people found it difficult to believe that he would intentionally harm anyone he loved. But these points alone do not guarantee his innocence, as there are several arguments you could make to prove otherwise. Prosecutors argued that Pistorius had a history of recklessness with firearms, including an incident in which he fired a gun in a crowded restaurant. This history could suggest that he had a disregard for gun safety, and that his actions were not consistent with someone acting in self-defense. Also, some witnesses testified that they heard arguing and screaming coming from Oscar's home before the shots were fired, which could suggest that there was an argument going on between Pistorius and Steenkamp before the shooting took place. The prosecution also argued that Oscar's actions after the shooting, including the fact that he did not immediately call for help and that he tampered with the crime scene, were consistent with someone who had malice intentions. Oscar's relationship with Reva was troubled, and there was evidence of previous arguments and incidents of violence between them. Again, this could suggest that Pistorius did in fact have a motive for intentionally taking her life. The prosecution also pointed out inconsistencies in Oscar's account of the events leading up to the shooting, which could suggest that he was lying about mistaking Reva for an intruder, as he simply couldn't keep his story straight. The judge even stated that Oscar was not a credible witness and that his testimony was contradictory and exaggerated in several aspects. Now, regardless of opinion, Oscar Pistorius should be eligible for early release just like anybody else, as the law dictates that we must give people a chance to redeem themselves. However, in this case, did Oscar deserve to have his request for early release rejected? Well, looking at the facts of the latest trial, Pistorius was not granted early release from prison because he had not yet served the minimum required sentence for his crime. When he was initially sentenced, the South African law at the time allowed for offenders to be considered for parole after serving 1/6 of their sentence, provided that they met certain criteria and that the parole board approved their release. However, as we previously discussed, Pistorius later had his charges upgraded after an appeal, and his sentence was increased to 13 years and 5 months in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 6 years of his sentence. Also, Pistorius did not qualify for any other forms of early release, such as day parole or medical parole, because he did not meet the eligibility criteria for these programs. Day parole is typically only granted to offenders who are deemed to pose a low risk of reoffending, and who are able to reintegrate into society under close supervision. Medical parole is granted to offenders who are terminally ill or severely disabled, and who are unable to continue serving their sentence in prison. So, ultimately in this case, the parole board determined that as he was not eligible for any early release programs, and that he had also not yet served the minimum required sentence for his crime, they were given no other option but to deny his parole on this occasion. But what do you think about his recent denial of early release? It's difficult to definitively say given all of the evidence available, but in my opinion, the clear answer is that he is guilty and therefore should remain behind bars for the remainder of his sentence. But the question that still plays on the minds of those who followed this story is whether or not this was in fact a planned attack, or a simple moment of insanity brought on by medication or mental health issues. Perhaps it was, but that still doesn't take away what he did, and you could argue that crimes such as this should be punished regardless of intention. Nevertheless, I'm very interested to hear what you guys think, so please leave your opinions down below so we can have a discussion in the comments. And as mentioned earlier, make sure to check out my other video on South African crime, which should be on screen now.